I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolin from What's Your Work Fit. I hope you are having a good and productive week. We've got a great show today lined up, but before we get to it, let me just offer my gratitude to all of you who have joined us on the What's Your Work Fit journey. We have slowly but surely built a community of people who are eagerly engaged in creating a work fit where work becomes a wonderful part of a day doing other wonderful things. So, to those of you who are brand new to this live show, I urge you to engage with us ongoing on the platform of your choice. We are on LinkedIn. You can hit that follow button. We're also on the What's Your Work Fit YouTube channel, and you can hit the black subscribe button. And that way, on either platform or both platforms, if you are on both, you will be up to speed on all new content, all recorded content, and also some of the blog posts we put up as well. One other thing I want to tee up for you. If you enjoy the experience of What's Your Work Fit, I urge you to tell 5 friends to subscribe on the platform of their choice. I'm telling you, I have not spent any money on social media to build this community. It's been completely organic. And while it's been slow and steady, it is solid as a rock. And I, again, thank you for all of your support. Okay, let's get to our guest today. Returning is Jessica Weiss. How are you, Jessica?
I'm good. How are you, Dan? Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. One of our favorite guests. So let's tell you about Jessica Weiss. She is a globally recognized TEDx speaker, coach, and consultant who teaches people and businesses how to find more happiness, fulfillment, and satisfaction at work. Beats a day job, doesn't it?
I think so.
Well,
it's my day job, so I guess it's a good one.
I love the work that you're doing, Jessica. I want to get right to the question this week, which was submitted by our live show viewer, Deborah. Hey, Deborah. Deborah is a business development manager and team leader at a B2B services company. And a growing portion of her job is now to provide feedback on individual performance. Deborah laments that she's never learned how to do feedback well, certainly to give it well, and she finds that sometimes her process doesn't always get the recipient to yes. So team members don't always understand the feedback she provides, or perhaps they take what she thinks is constructive criticism perhaps a little too harshly. So she says, I want to do right by them. So Jessica, she asks, how can I provide meaningful worker feedback? Let's get her started.
Okay, so I think that this process, and I like this question, meaningful worker feedback. I think that in order to hit on that term meaningful, right? In order for it to be a meaningful conversation, because it is a two-way street here. I think that this process starts a little bit further upstream. So for me, before you can even give meaningful feedback, you need to have a relationship between the two people, the feedback giver and the feedback receiver, that is based on trust, right? Because if you don't trust the person who's giving you the feedback, you're going to look at that person sideways and question what is their intention, what is their motive, why are they really saying any of this.
Mhm.
So if the relationship is not built on that trust foundation, or that foundation of trust, I think that that's sort of going to hijack the process from the get-go. So the first thing that you need to work on is this idea that the relationship needs to be one where both people trust each other. So that's the first thing that I would say.
Okay.
And there's lots of ways that you can do that. And that's something that happens over a period of time. And we can go into that. But let's just talk a little bit about feedback for a second, more specifically. So let's assume that we have that trusting relationship, that both people are coming at this from good intentions and all of that. I think that, and this is not going to be news, because anyone who's given feedback has heard this before, but everything in a feedback conversation, we need to remove emotion and go to the data, right? That is the way, the question that Deborah said, she said she feels that maybe the constructive feedback isn't being taken necessarily all that constructively. So I think that if you remove emotion as much as possible and ground your feedback in data, actual real facts that have happened, real events that have happened, not just feelings or thoughts or what should be or what could be, but what actually has happened, is the first way that you really need to do that. The second thing I think is that you need to be in a place where the person can hear the feedback. So even if you do a brilliant job delivering the feedback, if you give constructive, data filled, non-emotional, well-intentioned feedback, the person who's receiving the feedback needs to be in a place where they can receive it. And oftentimes that's really as simple as saying, hey, I've got some feedback for you. Do you want to hear it? Like, is this a good time? Really like a basic question.
Right.
And they have the option of saying, actually, no, right now is not a good time. I'm overwhelmed. I have a million things to do, but let's talk tomorrow morning at 10. Right. And then she's in a better place, or he's in a better place to receive it. So I think that in addition to thinking about giving feedback, you need to also think about the person on the other end who's receiving the feedback, and are they ready to hear it?
Right. So to review children,
That was a lot of information, right?
right. My wife teaches, so we were always reviewing everything. Take the emotion out of it, bring up the metrics. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I want to get to Ted's comment. So his focus revolves, he had mentioned to me, he's kind of less of a manager, more of a team leader at this point. And he finds that the feedback is treated by recipients differently in a team environment versus an individual environment. I wonder how feedback has changed, because so many people are effectively in a hive, if you will, in a team, and they are accountable and responsible to each other, but also to a team lead. So how unmuddle that for us, if you would, Jess.
So I would need a little bit more information on this question. So I find that the feedback is treated differently to the team than it is to individuals. So I'm going to make some assumptions here.
Go ahead.
When you say, I find that the feedback is treated differently to the team than it is to individuals, I think it's easier to take constructive feedback, maybe if it's being given to the entire team rather than pointing to one particular person, right?
Right.
So maybe this might be a better way to give, let's call the most constructive feedback. It might be a better environment to give it to a team rather than to an individual, because naturally our backs go up if you're saying, Jessica, you did X, Y, and Z, as opposed to, listen, everybody, we didn't do a great job on that. And, I think that it might be easier to receive it in a team setting than it is in an individual setting. But I made a lot of assumptions about that question, Dan. So if I'm wrong, please,
I think
realign me.
I think you answered it well, and I'm wondering if that pearl of wisdom is what you just said, which is, since so many people do operate in a team setting, since so much of their deliverables are dependent upon one another, maybe you start with the team, and if
Yeah.
it's a squeaky wheel within the team, then you pull them aside. You don't start at the individual level where it could become uh, potentially hurtful or feeling singled
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. I think also we're in a very kind of I don't know, the environment has changed, let's say, right? People let's just call it what it is. Right now, we're in the middle of election season. There's lots of opinions going on. Everybody's kind of very emotionally charged. So I
Mm.
think that anything that we can do to dial down emotions is going to be for the best. So if that means not singling people out and kind of doing a collective group, I'm all for that.
Interesting comment that you made. Last week, we had Ryan Anderson on from Miller Knoll, who's like the maven of research and insight at that interior design brand. And what he said, he is based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is literally split down the center in terms of left right. And what he said to us was that the office is like an oasis,
Oh, that's
where
interesting.
at the office, in the co-location or in the workplace, if you will, people operate as kind-hearted adults, if you will,
That's
and
great.
they leave the stuff that doesn't belong in the workplace at the door.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love to hear that. And that's wonderful. Like they're super lucky. I just don't know that that applies to every workplace.
So let's get to Hale. Hale, how you doing? To make feedback meaningful, what things do I need to concentrate on? You mentioned data.
Mhm.
Is there anything else? Context?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's what I was just gonna say. I was gonna say it like, why are you giving the feedback? So, in other words, what's your intention here with giving the feedback? Just giving somebody feedback without giving them the full picture or the context, as you said, Dan. I think that that's a critical piece. So, I'm giving this to you. I think this is something that you need to know because it might be a blind spot, or this is something that you might need to think about because of the way that the company is moving forward, and this might be something that you need to kind of hone in on or focus or concentrate on. Again, anything you can do to depersonalize it is always for the best. But I think giving context so people understand, because giving people feedback just out of the clear blue, without understanding the full picture, the full background, where this is coming from, why am I saying it? I think that that's an incredibly important piece.
I have to imagine that you've detected probably some generational differences in
Sure.
how people, both managers slash leaders and members of headcount, uh, provide and receive meaningful feedback. Um, I'm an old guy. I was in the workplace a long time, and I can tell you that uh, in a highly charged workplace, I was in the ad agency business. Woof. If you worked for somebody who was amped up, be it a hiring manager or an internal client, just being in the room with them about to get feedback sent your blood pressure
Sure.
skyward.
Yeah.
The flip of that is people who are in Gen Z right now, who are the biggest growing cohort within the workplace, who are openly, for the most part, openly seeking regular, meaningful feedback because they feel that's how they're going to learn the job. That's how
Yeah.
they're going to learn to do the job well. That's how they're going to meet and exceed expectations.
Mhm.
What have you learned about the generational differences to how we relate to meaningful feedback? I'm
Yeah.
interested.
Well, there's real generational differences, right? I think Gen Z approaches work very differently than the previous generations.
Mhm.
I think that Gen Z is kind of approaching things with a fresh perspective, and let's call it a different perspective, right? So they're really demanding that their job brings them that satisfaction that they're looking for, and they're in a place where maybe moving around is less risky than when you're more established and you've got more responsibilities. So they're willing to maybe cut and run more than other people who are a bit older and a bit more established in their career and things have deeper consequences. So I think that Gen Z is pushing all of us to think about things that we didn't really think about before. So
Right.
I think that they are establishing, like really establishing this idea that, and of boundaries, right? Because over the past few years, there's been a real blending of the boundaries. And I think that they really kind of push back on that, as they should. And I think that that's great. I think that with that fresh perspective comes a little bit of maybe the pendulum swinging in the opposite direction a bit too far, right? Because maybe millennial, Gen X, everybody else has kind of a different set of expectations. But I think that the most important thing in terms of diversity in the workplace, because I think that that's a huge component to happiness at work, is this
Mhm.
idea that we figure out how all generations can work together. And I think that fresh new perspective, and maybe the perspective of people who've been in the workplace a little bit longer, the wiser, the more experienced folks, I think together we can get to someplace really interesting. But I do think that Gen Z is pushing all of us to think a little bit differently.
So looking at your clients, or let me take a step back. I would assume that your clients are really smart because they've hired you to help them get to a better place. But if in another company where let's pick a vertical, financial services,
Uh-huh.
it goes from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat every day. Things are tense.
Yeah.
Decisions are made on the fly. A split second decision could mean the difference of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of P&L impact.
Hmm.
Um, I have spoken to people in that space who were like, I was never taught how to do this.
Hmm.
I'm a money guy. I was brought
Hmm.
in because I know how to manage a portfolio, and I
Hmm.
think I know how to manage people, but I manage them my way,
Hmm.
which
Which most of the time is poorly.
exactly. So, what has your experience been with clients and prospects who recognize because their managers are coming to them and saying, "Hey, we need somebody. If this is important to you, you're telling us, uh, and I recognize that it's important, but I'm not doing it well. How do we change our internal processes to make that happen?"
Yeah. So I actually do a fair amount of work in financial services. So it's funny that you bring it up. Um, I think that in the past few years, there's been a greater awareness around the skills necessary to manage people. So
Right.
while we all know what their main focus is, I think that that world has started to realize that if you want to retain talent, if you want to have the best talent, if you want to have a culture that continues to innovate
Hmm.
and really kind of performs at the top level, the people part of it is a huge part of it. But oftentimes, what I have found, probably similar to your experience in advertising, is in financial services, there tends to be a lot of toxic culture, period. Right? It's just a toxic kind of industry because they've been allowed to get away with that behavior for so long. So it feels like you're moving like a huge rock up Mount Everest. And the way that I always say that the best way to start in those kind of places is you start with yourself and your team. Right. And once you start to make changes with yourself and your team, that is sort of the contagion that starts to spread throughout the industry, throughout the organization. So,
Mm.
it's an uphill battle for sure. And also what it tends to happen is like what's calcified in these organizations is the bad behavior. So people don't
Mm.
even know that they're doing it because it's just kind of like, well, this is the way that we do it here. And I'm like, actually that's not okay. That's not normal. Like you can start to change it. But a big piece of that is the awareness. So I think that, people are like, how on earth am I ever going to change? You start with yourself and you start with your team. And then your team can be this beautiful, exactly as you put it earlier, right? This beautiful oasis where we are not toxic. We have open communication. We have a foundation of trust. Everybody here gives constructive feedback. We're all getting better at our jobs. We are innovating at the highest level. And that will start to spread. And I have seen this happen. That will start to spread in an organization because it'll be like, hey, Max's team is like doing amazing. What are they doing? What are they
Mm.
doing? They're listening to each other. They're establishing boundaries and priorities. They're putting in place more of a work-life balance. They're getting rid of this idea that you need to stick in the office just to have FaceTime. So and then what starts to happen is it slowly starts to bleed into other parts of the organization. But a big part of what I do when I talk about happiness generally is like you are in control of yourself. And
Mhm.
beyond that, you are in control of your team. And that's where you start to make the changes.
So Mark Griffin offered up this can making feedback stakeholder centered help create better workplace outcomes? So the idea behind that is if you're on a team, you have a stake in the success of what you're doing versus it's just a paycheck.
Mhm.
Um, does does framing the feedback around what we're all trying to do and your stake in it have resonance? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that that's really important. I think that teams that feel that they have a purpose, a unified purpose together as a team, and
Mhm.
they understand what their purpose is, all of that can tie into the feedback. And that's when I was thinking about the stakeholder centered feedback, right? If we all understand what our purpose is and what impact we're trying to make, kind of basing the feedback in that makes it way easier to be received and infinitely more effective, I think.
Does that tend to happen more in teams where people have to work together to create an outcome?
I
The
think it
stakeholder
depends.
aspects.
I think it depends on the leader of the team and how much they understand how important people really need to understand, not even necessarily the word purpose, because I think that that
Mm,
kind of gets a little bit eye rolly. Like, I don't know what my purpose is. I'm here to collect my paycheck. But you could certainly understand what your impact is, right? Like,
right.
you want to know that when you don't show up at work for a week, like they missed you because you make an impact, right? So if everybody understands what their impact is, and then you as a team, you understand what your impact is, I love the idea of centering the feedback around that. I think that that's incredibly effective, but it does depend upon the leader's ability to, and that's a skill, right? The leader's ability to have each team member understand what their impact is.
I, I I put up Mark's question because I've had experience working with military veterans who pivoted into the management ranks, and if they were junior grade commissioned officers, this is what they did. They they had to create stakeholder involvement within their battalions to be successful and not get killed.
Right.
I'm
Well, your purpose there, your impact there is quite clear.
but I would hear from people that they would say to me, I I can pick up if something's off. And so I know how to go to them because I was doing this in the most extreme of places, in a forward base in Afghanistan. And now, I'm in the management ranks. This seems easy peasy to me because I've dealt with the extreme and I think I know how to fix this.
Well, I think that in certain organizations, your purpose and your impact is much clearer than in others, but that doesn't mean that we all can't understand what it is and
Right.
what the stakes are, right? I'm saying impact, you're saying stakeholder, but it's the same thing. It's just a semantics thing. Um, but I think that that's really important. I think that if
Mm,
people understand, if they're, if this feedback is going to why your work is less than, or your work product is not meeting the client standards, if you understand what's at stake for everybody, I think that
right.
that makes it much easier to receive.
So I'm going to go to one more viewer question from Gigi, and she mentioned about the annual review. Is it on the way out? And she says, in the new workplace, I think it creates more harm than good. Well, she may be right. I'm I'm hopeful that we're getting to a trend of less formal, more frequent engagement.
Yeah.
And
I-
so I want to get to something that you probably saw last week, and this was from a study by Gallup and Workhuman. It was just published last week, and it talks about the additive effect of weekly
mhm,
recognition. This is interesting. Um, Less than weekly recognition tended to correlate with lower levels
mhm.
of workplace engagement than
Yeah.
more frequent weekly or whatever engagement whereby it's less formal,
Yeah.
um, goes to those metrics that you talked about, cause and effect, perhaps even some of the stakeholder buttons, if you will. What do you think about this?
Yeah. I think that this is dead on with what I'm seeing in practice. And I think that, there's another stat similar to this. It's like one good conversation a week is enough to like move the engagement scale of everybody significantly. One good, meaningful conversation. So I love this for so many reasons. First of
Mhm.
all, I think that feedback is more effective when it's given in the moment rather than if we go back to the question that Gigi asked,
Right.
yearly review. If someone's giving you feedback about in January what happened last July, it's not
Right.
really going to have much meaning. But if you are like in a meeting right now, you say, hey, can I just quickly give you some feedback about what just happened? Or can we talk tomorrow about what just happened? That's going to be way more impactful than giving it 6, 8, 9 months later. So I love the idea of weekly recognition. I think that people literally need it. And I think it's a more effective way to give feedback. I think that giving it in the moment and also making it a bit more spontaneous, having less weight around it, having less pressure and less stress, and just kind of making it part of your day to day, part of the way that we work. I think that it's incredibly effective.
Well, I'll put some pedal to the metal here. For one particular new entrant to the workplace who is learning how to do their job and feels like for the first 3 to 6 months they were muddling through,
Sure.
getting this kind of feedback, and I heard from this person, getting this kind of feedback, and the feedback was said person really, delivered on this project. Here were the metric outcomes that happened. And the metric outcomes were money. They weren't percentage increases or whatever that could mean anything. They were the positive revenue delta that happened because this person did X, Y, and Z. And what she said to me, it was a she said, that was like a B12 shot.
Yeah.
Suddenly I gained confidence I didn't know I had.
Sure, sure. That makes perfect sense. Perfect. And I think that it's vital,
Yeah.
vital for new workers. But I think it's equally as important for those of us who've been around for a while,
Right.
right? You want to know that you're doing, one of the key markers of happiness and satisfaction at work is clear, like knowing what's expected of you, clear expectations. And the way that you establish those expectations and the priorities is in these weekly conversations.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. And it's so easy to do. Like
Right.
it's so easy. Why aren't
She
we doing it?
she said it was spontaneous.
Right.
It popped up in a team meeting. I want to call out her accomplishment last
Right.
week. We
Yeah.
didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
And she said it filled her sails. And whether that's in the workplace or in the schoolroom. I mean, my
Yeah.
daughter's studying to be a nurse now, and getting some recognition from the faculty
Sure.
members um, turned uncertainty into getting A's on tests.
Of course.
And
I'm sure.
I said to her, Darren, you've hit a new milestone. Keep going, keep
Yeah.
going, keep going.
Sure.
So I can imagine equally as effective in the workplace. And yes, you bring up a very good point. We are a 5 generational workplace right now.
Yeah.
And even people who are, uh, at the late end of baby boomers who are still there are learning new things. The
Sure.
job that they're doing now is so different from the job they were doing 3 years ago,
Yeah.
4 years ago, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I think that on this note, it is important to call out that, and this would be something that Gen Z calls attention to, right? So
Yeah.
it's this idea of giving recognition. We need to know that different people like to get recognition in different ways. So
Right.
while some people might love to get that recognition and that feedback in a team meeting surrounded by other people might need to receive it in a quieter, more singular environment. So I think it's important with that recognition and with those one-on-one conversations that we acknowledge that there are differences in how people want to receive it. And I think that that's important.
Well, and that gets to knowing your head count and knowing their learning and their recognition styles.
Yeah.
I used to have this in recruiting too. I mean, I recruited extroverts, introverts, and ambiverts,
Right.
and they all rolled differently. And
Sure.
we would survey them, and how they processed information was different.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of work,
Yeah.
to do that and then get the benefit of it.
Yeah.
So, Jess, I want to turn the conversation to your work, happiness, and you're the happiness expert here. Um, and the work you're doing is really so critical to companies because I see where it has huge bottom line impacts on the workplace. Not only are they capable of generating more revenue, most importantly, their lifetime investment in talent increases exponentially. Happy people don't leave.
Right.
So, what kinds of things have you learned in 2024 that you think have had some stickiness in the work that you do?
Meaning, what are the things that people are looking for at work that bring them more happiness? What are the things that are working, so to speak?
What are the things that are working for them? But what about happiness has perhaps changed this year that you've
Mm,
discovered?
mm. So I haven't noticed. See, for me, happiness is not really kind of the way that, happiness is such a heavy weighted word and
Yeah.
everybody has a different definition of it, right? So some people think of happiness as like this ability to smile all the time and sort of express positive emotion. But for me, happiness, that's not my definition of
Hmm.
happiness, right? So people love to say like happiness is a choice. And that actually, I don't believe that. I mean, I'm not going to take that away from anybody. So I'm always like, anything you need to do to be happy works for me. But I don't think that happiness is a choice. I think that there are things that we can do that we can learn from decades and decades of research now that happiness is no longer a choice. It's just the way that we choose to live our lives. And if we put these kind of very basic strategies and habits and tools into our toolkit, that's how we find happiness.
Mm,
So I don't think that happiness, it doesn't waver all that much year to year. It's not that in 2024, I'm finding that more people are leaning into this idea of psychological safety or whatever it is, but I think that people certainly, I think what has happened since the post-pandemic world is
yeah.
that there is an awareness that we need to have more satisfaction from our work, that we don't have to, just kind of suck it up and trudge along. And I think that that has been the big learning in the past few years, that actually it's possible. I was at a party the other day and I was talking to this woman and she's like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I teach people about how to find more happiness at work." And she said to me, "Really? Is that even possible?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, yes, it is."
Well, I think one of the difficult things with the term happiness is that, I don't know, coming out of advertising, it is so suffused to the work that we used to do because men, they say, "What do you have? What do you have when you get happiness? You just want more happiness."
That's true.
It's like it's like a
A treadmill.
well, I was going to think of a sand dial where the sand runs out and you got to turn it over again.
Right.
Um, some countries, and Gallup has found this. The term of choice is contentment, like in
Mhm,
Norway. They
mhm.
they they're not an outwardly happy people. If you see like stock footage of people in Oslo,
Right.
they're not smiling and
Yeah, yeah,
circus
yeah.
acting, but they're content with their lives. Their
Yeah,
lives are meaningful in the sense that they're getting something good out of whatever they're
sure,
doing.
sure.
So happiness, I think, for a lot of people, uh, tends to be a narrow vision, but it can mean a lot of different things to different people.
No, definitely. I mean, Israel is pretty high on that happiness country scale, which is ironic because they're always like in some form of
Neurotic.
war, right? So, and they are amongst the happiest countries in the world, and that's because their happiness comes from a much more deep-seated place. Have
Right.
you heard about the happiness blue zones? Have you heard about blue zones?
Yes.
And have you
I
heard that
think that
there's the happiness blue zones now?
I think that's been on CNN. Or
There
maybe
was
on one
a
of the.
there was a special on Netflix about the
Okay, I
blue
was going to
zones.
say, if
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
CNN, on one of the streaming
Yeah,
channels. Yes.
and so the blue zones is about this idea of longevity and these
Right.
places that have abnormal longevity, and not only longevity but people who thrive and live well into their hundreds, but they're flourishing. It's like a,
Right.
you're living, you're not surviving. But the researcher took it a bit further and looked at happiness blue zones. And there's like 5 places around the world, and they have a common thread, and it's not about making more money, and it's not
No.
about buying more things, and it's not even countries necessarily that you would imagine. So it's Denmark, it's Singapore, it's Costa Rica, Boulder, Colorado, and I'm forgetting the other one. But but there's interesting and very common threads that go throughout all of them. And it's about this idea of community and relationships,
Right.
all of the kind of much more like, it's the things that it's not about a choice. It's about the way that you choose to live your life, right? It's your everyday choices. It's what you've established. So that's why I say happiness is not necessarily fleeting. And you said contentment, I say satisfaction, but it's the same kind of thing.
So Earl Hogue from Canada. Good day, sir. Denmark is one of those, and they have a
They
word
do.
for happiness at work. The Danish word, oh, forget it. Earl, I cannot pronounce that. Oh, you even did it with the special character set. Whatever that is, it means happiness at work. It refers to the feeling of looking forward to work and
Yes,
having a
that's
job that
awesome.
energizes you. Bravo, Earl.
Yeah. And I've done a good amount of work looking at Denmark specifically. And what's ironic about Denmark is they work significantly less than we do in the United States, like significantly less. But what they do is they look forward to what they do after work so that when they are at work, they maximize their time, their satisfaction, and their happiness at work. Come on, man, give it a try.
Yeah.
It's a farfaglugen for
Yeah. Farfenuggen. Um, I
But
noticed
yeah,
that.
Denmark is super interesting.
I
I
noticed
mean,
that.
I
Yeah.
think the Danes work 33 hours a week. Like, really. Like, it's a significant difference than Americans.
Okay, so that gets to this time worn, probably goes back to Benjamin Franklin, focus on the clock and time.
Mhm.
And time is money and time is irreplaceable.
Sure.
And probably, if I use my brain hard enough, probably Protestant Reformation thinking where, you maximized all these efforts at work and you maximize time
Mhm.
most of all. And in a consumer society like America, like the
Mhm.
United States of America, and I was the victim of this. You just set aside more time to be productive.
Mhm.
I don't know about you. When I was younger and stupider, I worked 80 hours a week at an agency job. Oh, and I was knocking it out of the park, metric wise,
Mhm.
except for my health.
Right.
So I think the Danes have it right. Thank you,
Mhm.
Earl. And certainly, I noticed this in Amsterdam. They really had it right. I mean, I
Mhm.
would watch people. My wife and I would be outside at an outdoor uh, venue, and we would just be people watching, and people just seem to be relating to each other very
Mhm.
naturally and
Mhm.
not with a lot of tension, if you will, like I experienced working in Midtown Manhattan and so forth and so on. Um, we need to learn
Mhm.
from the work that certainly Gallup is doing, but some of the other studies out there that
Mhm.
are looking at how we can take what's going on in Denmark, so to speak,
Mhm.
and reimagine it for the lives we all want to lead now,
Yeah.
which
Well,
is the work fit.
a big thing in Denmark is this idea of community and connection. And all, Denmark is a huge country where people join clubs, right? So this
Mm,
idea, it's sort of extracurricular activity, right? To bring it back to school. It's this idea that and the clubs kind of give you this opportunity, A, to feed your brain, right? Because you're doing something that you're interested in. B, to connect with other human beings. And C, you start to establish a community of networks, right? It's all of these multiple clubs across the entire community. So it's this idea of being connected. And I think that despite the fact that it's freezing cold there,
right.
despite the fact that it gets dark super early,
Hmm.
all of the reasons that we all want to stay in and not do anything, they have overcome all of that by understanding that we need to be connected to other human beings. Like that, this idea of connection, community, friendship, it's a huge
Right.
thing that I talk about all the time. But that is a primary driver of happiness. Happiness at work, happiness in life, happiness, period. I talk about friends at work. I think that that's a huge, people who have friends at work are 92% more productive or something. And the truth of the matter is only 20% of us have a friend at work. So many people assume that when you go to work, you don't need friends. Actually, that's the most important thing you need at work, right? It doesn't even matter what you're working on. It matters who you're working with. So this idea that I don't need friends at work, which is kind of like a uniquely American phenomenon, I do my best to change that idea.
I will take a variation of the theme on that. I think we'd like to have friends at work. I know when I first started off in the workplace, I had friends at work because we were young up and comers, and it just seemed natural at the end of the day to go to a watering hole and shoot the breeze and get to know each other. But I've often wondered how, with distributed workplaces becoming more common now, um, how the friendships evolved, because it's not as natural as it used to be when we were all co-located.
Well, I think also there's a big return to office now. So I think
Yeah.
that the days of completely 100% remote working might be part of our past. We're certainly moving into more of a hybrid situation. But I don't think that remote working precludes us from having
No,
friends
it
at work.
doesn't. You are correct.
So, right. So I think that you just need to look at it with a little bit of a different intentionality. So yes, you don't have the spontaneity, you don't have the bumping into somebody, but you can be a little bit more intentional about it if you make that one of your priorities at work. And I think that most people don't. Most people do not make this idea that you need to connect with your colleagues a central priority to enjoying your work.
But to your point earlier, these outside interests, when we were in the Netherlands, we saw this in Amsterdam, we saw this in Rotterdam. Huge maker community
Mm,
where people, have 3D printers and they make stuff together.
right. Right.
And
Well, when you get together and do something meaningful together, it juices up the connection even more.
exactly. Exactly. But even if they don't intersect, the communal aspects of working together in that makers group may have benefits to the work you're doing, for a day job, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Robert Waldinger did a study out of Harvard. It's the
Mm,
longest running study on happiness, and it's over 85 years.
mhm.
I'm sure you've seen him. He talks about it. And he said, amongst many things that he talks about, of course, he says that relationships are the most important driver of happiness. But along the lines of what you're saying, he says, if you get together and exercise with a friend, the fact that you are connecting with a friend, doing a physical activity, that is a key to happiness. Key to happiness.
Right.
I work very hard to do that. I meet a friend nearly every morning. We go for a walk in Central Park. We're connecting on an emotional level. We're doing something physical together. I mean, this is first of all, it's doable, and it's
Yeah.
something that everybody should be doing if you want to drive your happiness.
Yeah, my wife certainly takes advantage of that with the people she works with in teaching, and also the side hustle in vintage clothes, where she's gotten to meet a lot of people, and those have become her friends, and I love that. My wife does. It's got a beautiful day down here in the DC area today. I know she'll be staying late to go walk the track at school with her buddy, and I think that's great. That may be the best part of her day.
Sure, I'm sure it is, to be honest.
So, Jessica Weiss, we've run out of time. Which really disappoint me, because I love talking to you. You're so interesting, and I think you bring so much to the broader future of work and workplace discussion.
Thank you.
We're going to go back in time about 9, 10 months to when you were last on, and we asked you the question, "What's your work fit?" So we have that here. I want you to watch it,
Okay.
and you tell me how your work fit has changed or if it has stayed the same. So here we
Okay.
go. I want to get to the question that we ask all of our guests, which is, what's your work fit? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes the work that you do a wonderful part of your day, doing many wonderful and meaningful things, and not the all consuming time suck of a day? What's your work fit, Jessica?
So for me, the most important driver of my satisfaction at work, so my work fit is to feel that I'm having an impact.
So I need to know that my work is impactful. So I do my keynotes, and I like to know that I'm leaving people in a different place than when they sat down, right? So that's it from that perspective. I do a lot of coaching work, and that impact that I feel from my coaching work is immediate and wonderful. But I am a human being who needs to feel that my work matters and that it's impactful and it has positive consequences, throughout my life cycle of work.
Well, what do you think? What's changed, or has anything changed?
I have to say, I will never get used to seeing myself on video, even as a professional speaker. And I watch myself all the time. I'm always like, oh, geez. Okay. Okay, so what has changed? That is very important to me. I still am, and I was even talking about it today, right? This idea that you have impact. I would put a slight twist on it recently for me. It's this idea that I am living up to my potential. So it's very important for me. I am a classic overachiever, type A personality. So maybe not overachiever, but let's say type A personality. So it's very important that I feel that I am living up to my potential. So that is a very important driver of my happiness, that I feel that I'm growing and I'm learning and I'm pushing. That's been the latest theme for me. What about you, Dan?
It's giving people the opportunity to find their own work fit. It's this show, among other things. I mean, like you, I grew up in a culture of making the world a better place. That extends to people too.
Sure.
I mean, that's my through line. Make the world and people better. Do what I can to make their experience better in the world.
Yeah.
And I hope that I've made it. I think I have. I hear from some people that really enjoy what we're doing here, and they, my work in recruitment beforehand, and certainly the work I did before that. I mean, I worked very hard to make the outcome better than the starting point.
Sure. I love it.
Yeah. Total A type, by the way. Total
Yeah.
A type. So Jessica Weiss, thank you so much. Before we depart, please point our viewers and listeners to where they can find you on social media so that they can learn more about you and perhaps have a conversation with you.
Sure. So my website is jessicaweiss.com. They can certainly find me on LinkedIn, and I'm on Instagram as the Jessica Weiss. So those are the places where you can find me these days.
And where would they find your TED Talks?
On YouTube. So you just have to do Jessica Weiss, and the title of my TEDx, or at least the easiest one to find, is Happiness, It's an Inside Job.
Audience, this is your homework. Go to that TEDx talk that Jess did. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, buddy, thank you so much. I hope I get to see you next month in New York.
Yes, that would be awesome.
And stick around. We're gonna end the show, but meet me in the green room.
Okay.